It's one of the scariest books in terms of the message that we have in the book, but it is also one of the most beautiful because of the hope and part of the message that we have. So you've got those sort of two things that are going on in this particular book. I say scary because on the one hand, God gets to a point where he tells Jeremiah that, and I don't remember in other books hearing this, where he says, don't even come to me and try to intervene for the people because I won't listen. He even goes as far as, even if Moses or Samuel were to come to me to intercede for these people, I will not listen because things have gotten that bad. People have drifted away from God so far that God will not even listen. However, you get to a point where God also says that to Jeremiah, go tell these people that maybe I may relent of this calamity that is about to, come upon them. If they repent and they return, then I will change my mind about what's happened. So there is hope. And then there is this promise of the branch that will come, and we'll look at some scriptures with that. Let me do this just, for those, if you haven't read the book in a while or if you were looking through it, let me do a quick summary to bring you up to speed on the position that they had reached by the time Jeremiah is prophesying. We have gone now from the book of Judges, and we're almost, by the time Jeremiah is prophesying, we're almost in a very similar position where people are doing sort of whatever they wanted. Probably not as bad, probably worse, depending on how you're looking at it. But we've gotten to this point now where idolatry, which is one of the biggest issues that you will see when Jeremiah is called to prophesy here, it's idolatry. And the other thing that you need to remember as you're reading this, pretty much all of the Old Testament, is covenant. Covenant. Even when the word covenant is not mentioned, I would argue that it is everywhere presupposed. It is always, have you kept my covenant? You have not kept my covenant. God has been faithful to his covenant. We need to remember this when we're reading this, that it is not disconnected to that. It's everything to do with the covenant. There'll be mention of this in the passages that we'll look at. So we've gone now from that point, going from the judges, now they have kings, they have David. God makes a covenant with David. You shall never lack a man on the throne. His throne shall be forever. And then Solomon and all the other descendants of David, the other kings that we have, and we get to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah is a good king, has his faults, but he's a good king. And during Hezekiah's time, Assyria is the superpower. Egypt becomes a vassal of Assyria, and they've come out, he lays siege on Jerusalem. And Hezekiah is desperate. There's absolutely nothing he can do. There's a vast army. You've got Sennacherib outside the walls trying to persuade people to defect to the king of Assyria. And the people are just waiting for Hezekiah. Hezekiah goes and prays and sends messages to Isaiah, and this is in Isaiah, by the way, and he says, thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, rebuke, and rejection, for the children have come to birth, but there's no strength to deliver, meaning that the situation is desperate. There's absolutely nothing. And he recognizes that salvation has to come from the Lord. So Isaiah sends good news that God is going, God goes out and fights the battle, and Sennacherib is defeated. Well, that doesn't last. After Hezekiah comes his son, Manasseh. Manasseh is the longest reigning king of all the kings of Judah, I believe, 55 years. But he is also the most evil. He becomes a vassal of Assyria. For one reason or another, whether it's to appease the king of Assyria or so, he begins to bring vessels of the Assyrian gods into the house of God. He builds temples, has some of the Levites saving in all these places. Now the whole land, they're pretty much idolatry. one of the biggest problems, the challenges that we have. You can kind of think of it kind of where we're at if you're looking at sort of our culture and everything where we are now, where everything kind of goes. So this is the scenario that we're in now, that Judah and the half tribe of Benjamin, they're all under the Assyrian king at that point, and they're worshiping foreign gods, and God calls Jeremiah to prophesy during this time. It is not an easy time for any prophet to be prophesying during this time. And after Manasseh, who, by the way, as evil as he is, in 2 Chronicles, he repented towards the end of his life. But it was too late for him to reverse everything that he had done. And Amon, his son, becomes king for a short period of time. And then comes Josiah, who's 8 years old. Jeremiah is called to prophesy in the 13th year of Josiah. And Josiah is the last good king of Judah that we have. He goes and takes down all those high places, removes all those vessels that were put in from the foreign gods. And in fact, it is that time, in the 13th year, that God calls Jeremiah to start prophesying. So that's sort of the timeline that we sort of have of what's been happening in this case. Now they also go into the temple and they find the book of the law that had been lost in the temple for a very long time. Some believe it's the book of Deuteronomy, and they read the book of the law, and the king commands everyone. And for the first time since Samuel, they actually celebrate the Passover. So that's the scenario that we have. Though after that, what does Josiah do? The Assyrians are still in power. You've got Egypt on the other side, but you've got another rising power, Babylon, that's coming up. There's been a battle of Kashmish, where Babylon is trying to gain territory against the king of Assyria. Egypt is a vassal of Assyria and sort of aligned to Assyria at that point. And now the king of Egypt hears that Babylon is coming to territory. He leaves Egypt to go battle with the Babylons. On his way up there, Josiah, who's sort of aligned with Babylon, goes out to meet him. He's given a message by the Lord through Necho to say, I have nothing to do with you, withdraw from me. He doesn't listen. Josiah is killed. And the people take his son, Joachim, and make him king. Necho goes out to fight the Babylon. On his way back, he comes and he takes Josiah's son to Egypt as a slave, and he dies in Egypt and puts his brother on the throne. That doesn't last very long. The Babylonians finally come in and they take him into exile and they put Zedekiah. This is where we are as you're reading the book of Jeremiah. This is the situation that there is. Sin is rampant. Idolatry is rampant. Then it's within this time now that Jeremiah begins to prophesy, and it's not very easy for him. We often call him the weeping prophet, but you can see why when you see the situation that he sees and the suffering that he goes through. Not that all the other prophets weren't suffering. I thought that would be bigger there. But I wanted to sort of start here. God goes to them and said, Nebuchadnezzar is my servant. You are going to serve him. He tells all the other nations, not just Judah, but he tells all the other nations to say, if you will follow and serve the king of Babylon, you will indeed stay in your land, if they will listen. So Jeremiah is prophesying and he's telling the people, go out, serve the king of Babylon, because he's God's servant. And if you do, guess what? You will live. And here is one of the passages. You shall also say to the people, thus says the Lord, behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. He who dwells in this city will die by the sword or by famine or by pestilence. But he who goes and falls away to the Chaldeans, who is besieging, you will leave, and you will have his own life as booty. For I have set my face against this city to harm, for harm and not for good, declares the Lord. It will be given into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will burn it with fire. The reason why I have Deuteronomy is you have to be thinking about the blessings and curses in chapter 28. If you will follow the Lord, if you will follow the Lord's commandment, here are the blessings. You will stay in your land, all these things will happen. But if you don't, here's what will happen to you. So they have not followed, and they've gotten to this point, and God is prophesying through Jeremiah is prophesying that God is now sending them into exile. Exactly what they were warned in Deuteronomy 28. And when they were warned in Deuteronomy 29, there was a covenant renewal. We will follow God. Here's what we will do. And again, here, they have drifted away from God. They have not. And then this is the passage that is almost being quoted. It's not really being quoted, but this is what God is saying in verse 15. See, I've set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. In that I command you today to love the Lord your God and to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God bless you in the land where you are entering to possess it. Very similar, that they've gone through this cycle. God has made a covenant. This is to prove they have not been faithful. When Daniel prays, and by the way, he's quoting Jeremiah in part of his prayer, he's looking at this as time and time again, we and our fathers have not been faithful. We went through this when we were looking earlier on with the people. They go through a phase where they're following God, and then they'll go through a phase where they sort of drift away from God. So here again, in this particular here, you've gotten to this point where they have drifted so far from God, and now they're about to go into exile. Any questions or comments? There are two things that you always have to think about when you think about Israel. One is what their vocation was, and what the vocation of the Messiah was going to be. Why did God choose Israel? There are certain things that they were supposed to be the light to the nations. How were they going to do that? Justice and righteousness. Here in Jeremiah, look here. Then say to the house of the king of Judah, hear the word of the Lord, O house of David. Thus says the Lord, administer justice every morning and deliver the person who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor, that my wrath may not go forth like fire and burn with none to extinguish it because of the evil deeds. It's the idea that they were supposed to show justice and righteousness to all the nations. What about the promise? What was he supposed to do? Jeremiah 22. Do justice and righteousness and deliver the one who has been robbed from the power of his oppressor. Also, do not mistreat or do violence to the stranger, the orphan, the widow, and do not shed blood in this place. When the Messiah comes, the righteous branch, what is he supposed to do? justice and righteousness. We'll look at that particularly in Isaiah chapter 11, one of the scriptures that we're going to look at. And I do want to kind of walk through it. Go ahead, Reggie.
I just wanted to point out, this is another passage which shows that Jeremiah is not just about idolatry. Judah, had a lot of sins, and part of it was not loving God with all their heart, going to other gods, but also the way they treated their own brethren. You'll see this especially in the minor prophets, but this not loving your neighbor as yourself is extremely important to God, and this is one of the reasons his wrath is coming to that place.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It wasn't just idolatry. It was pretty much everything. I mean, we're sort of going back to the judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. There was no following the laws that God had given them. From what you see from Deuteronomy, one of the things that's striking is when they find the book of the law in Josiah and it's read, it's sort of a shock, which, by the way, it's the book of the law is lost in the temple. There's sort of something about that even for us, we can have the Bible in our home and not read it. We can have the message of salvation and it can be lost in our own homes. This book of the law is in the temple. And they had not even celebrated the Passover since the days of Samuel. This is, after they find the book of the law is when they actually go back, which means that all the generations that were coming up pretty much didn't know much about God because they weren't following God. They were just doing whatever they kind of wanted. Now, a lot of that is not spelled out for us, but really from just reading how people were behaving, how prophets, there were a good number of people that were saying they were prophets that had not been sent by God, that were prophesying. In essence, some that would say, yeah, Babylon is about, in 2 years, Babylon will fall apart. And then the exiles will return, those that had been taken by Nebuchadnezzar will return, but they had not been sent by God. That was not true. Because Jeremiah is prophesying and telling the people that God is asking them to serve the king of Babylon. By the way, the first time this happens, and you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that they would rather listen to the false prophets instead of Jeremiah, the true one. They wanted everything false about it. They wanted to hear everything just like today that itches their ear, and that's a warning.
That's a very good point. It's an interesting one because Nebuchadnezzar, somehow or another, knew of Jeremiah's prophecies. Because remember, Nebuchadnezzar is a crown prince. He's sent by his father who's aging, Nabopolassar, and he is back in Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar comes and is laying siege on Jerusalem. And right when he's out, he finds out that his father has died. So he goes back, and then he will return. And that first time when he goes back, he takes some of the exiles and some of the vessels that were in the temple. But the interesting, later on when he sends his commander to Judah, he specifically instructs them to make sure that no harm comes to Jeremiah. Because Nebuchadnezzar actually believes in the prophecies, because they actually said, you prophesied by your God that this would happen, that Nebuchadnezzar would conquer all these lands. And so he says, do no harm to him. That commander actually says to Jeremiah, when they're finally conquered and he's going back to Babylon, he says, do you want to go back? If you come with us, we'll take care of you and make sure you'll be provided for. But if you want to stay, you can stay. Which means the people to whom Jeremiah is actually sent to don't believe him. But the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, sees that everything that Jeremiah has prophesied has come to pass and has happened exactly the way that God had said through Jeremiah would happen. And they believe that that's rather ironic that the people to whom Jeremiah sent to, they're actually trying to kill him. They don't believe him. They would rather believe the false prophets that they had because there were so many of them.
They had the example of the Assyrians under Sennacherib being chased away. But if they had paid attention to, like Ezekiel, where he says that God's glory is going to leave the temple, that it's no longer going to be protected, then they might have listened to Jeremiah, who told them, go out and surrender to the Babylonians when they come.
Correct. They actually try to kill him when he says, thus says the Lord, that I'm going to destroy the temple the way that I did Shiloh. And for that, in essence, they believe more in the temple than they actually do the word of God. That somehow they believe that God will just protect the temple, that nothing is going to happen to the temple. So when Jeremiah tells them that this temple will be destroyed just the way that Shiloh was destroyed, they actually want to kill him. And they end up throwing him. He's saved by others that says, hey, that reminds them that remember, during Hezekiah's time that he prophesied, they did not kill him, and the narrative continues. But I want to get to this real quick because we'll run out of time. This is God now complains. I'm going to read verse 5 here in the interest of time, but you can look at it. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he will reign as king, and and act wisely, and do justice and righteousness. Remember justice and righteousness? This is now that righteous branch. Who is the righteous branch? Jesus. He will do justice and righteousness in the land. In the days of Judah, in his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely. And this is his name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. Did you think they understood what that meant? I sometimes feel like, would I have recognized that? I mean, if I was there, I think we judged them a little too harshly, but I mean, some things they should have gotten, but would you have known, especially if you're thinking about David, if you're thinking about where you have been, if you're thinking about David killing his thousands, and sitting on that throne, and this person that's coming is a descendant of David, a righteous branch. What's that going to look like? Here you have gone through being a vassal of Assyria, and at one point a vassal of Egypt, and now Babylon, and you're thinking that there is that promise that God has made, that there's one who's coming, who's going to sit on the throne of David. Because after all, every king after David, he did not do right, not like his father David. Every king is compared to David after that. It's almost like none of them, the throne is not theirs. They're just there, but it belongs to David, and every king that comes is David's throne. He's set on David's throne. Every single one. He did not do right, not according to his father, but he was like his father, but not quite. But they're all compared to David. And then you get to this point, and there is this promise. Would you think that that person would not be like David? At least not in the sense that they understood it. A warrior, someone that would go out and kill his thousands and defeat all these other kingdoms. And all the people would then return, the exiles would then return, and once again, Israel would be great. You had to pay attention, you had to understand a lot more. And I think this is where the New Testament writers help us to explain and to help us understand the Old Testament. Oh, that's a bit too small. How is God going to save his people? And how is God going to fulfill this third promise if his people are in exile? He promises that he's going to bring him back. At some point, God is going to have to bring a remnant back to the land, back to the promised land. And the promise there are two things. 70 years, there are two things. In 70 years, I will return you. But what else will happen in 70 years? Anybody? They will return, but the Babylonian Empire will end also at that point. Because who is then, in order to facilitate this happen, and God had already said through Isaiah that who was going to facilitate the return of the exiles? His servant Cyrus. Which means now that when the Babylonian Empire ends, Cyrus is then it's the rising power. The Medo-Persian Empire will take over. So you get to that, the people have to return. And when they return, the Messiah, when he comes, they're going to have to be in the land that God promised that they will. Now, verse 15 there, because we've got Lyle. Yeah, I was inching to go up. You're right. It's much easier. It's a little small there. In those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch of David to spring forth, and he shall execute justice and righteousness on the earth. Notice he didn't just say in Israel or Judah. On the earth. It goes beyond. In those days, Judah would be saved and Jerusalem would dwell in safety. And this is the name of which she will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Thus says the Lord, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. And the Levitical priest shall never lack a man before me to offer burnt offerings and to burn grain offerings and to prepare sacrifices continually. Those two offices, again, remember when we were looking at 1 Samuel and the Chronicles, the emphasis was on these two main offices. One of the two offices that this righteous branch is going to be priest and he's going to be king. This is one of those offices, just keeping that in mind. And God reassures the people that he made a covenant with David, that God is going to keep this covenant with David, and that's what you see there in Jeremiah 33. And these are pretty strong words. If you can change day and night, then I'll change my mind about the covenant that I made. That's pretty strong. If you can break my covenant for the day and my covenant for the night, so that day and night will not be at their appointed time, then my covenant may also be broken with David, my servant, so that he will not have a son to reign on his throne. It's going to happen. God is saying, I made a promise and it's going to happen. And it's not just my promise, the promise that I made with David. If you jump to verse 25, it also, the promise that I made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am going to make sure that this comes about. I am going to do it. God is faithful. God is righteous. He will do what he says he's going to do. I want to jump back to Isaiah in chapter 11. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a branch from his roots shall bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and his delight shall be the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what he sees, his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor. And I jump to verse 5. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist. I'm reading from the text, so some of it is summarized on the slide. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together. A little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra. And the weaned child shall put his hand into the adder's den, and they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Question: how do the waters cover the sea? The waters are the sea. What does that mean? The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. It's the idea, right?
And there's water up in the sky, and you got water over water. You got a separation in between, but
right.
Clouds.
But specifically here, the waters shall cover the seas. Roger.
I think what it's referring to is that the water of the sea fills the sea. There are no gaps, there are no holes, there are no empty spaces. It completely covers it. And so, in essence, that means when his word goes out into the world, it will cover the whole world, not just a portion of it.
It's the idea that everyone, everywhere, under the sun, the knowledge of God, after this righteous branch, will be everywhere. No one will say, I have not heard of the Lord, or I do not know the Lord. It's that expression that just says, if you're looking at the sea, the waters, it's vast. It just goes on and on and on, to where to the naked eye there's probably just no limit, I think. And in that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. This is what Paul cites in Romans chapter 15. The root of Jesse has risen to rule the nations, and in him the nations will hope. When this righteous branch comes, it is not just for the benefit of Judah and Israel. It shall be for the whole nation. It shall be for the whole world as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands. Exactly what Jeremiah was saying, that the remnant will return back and to the land, the promised land. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Jeremiah 31, and this is a pretty important one. In those days, they will not say again, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on the edge. But everyone will die for his own iniquity, and each man will eat the sour grapes. And each man who eats sour grapes, his teeth will be set on the edge. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made. What is the difference between the covenant, the old covenant and the new one? Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the days that I took them by hand and bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, declares the Lord, I will put my law within them, and on their heart, I will write it. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. They will not teach again, each man his neighbor, and each man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. And I put there that is the passage that is cited in Hebrews chapter 8. And some of it is cited elsewhere too, if you look at it. But what do you see as the differences between those two covenants?
The old covenant they were born into. The new covenant they are taught before they become Christians.
That's true. That's part of it. But he's also making some clear distinction here. And one of the reasons for verse 29, do you have a comment? Go ahead, finish your. Okay. And one of the things there is, in those days they will not say, meaning they used to say, that their fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on the edge. Right? But everyone will die for his own iniquity. What would happen if one person sins in the camp of Israel? There was usually some punishment that would impact the entire camp. Or if there was a sin, God would say, you and all your generations. For example, what was the punishment to Eli? Because he let his sons do whatever they wanted and he did not rebuke them, what did God say as a punishment? It wasn't just a punishment to his sons. It wasn't just a punishment to him. It was like all your generations. But not so in this new covenant. I sin, my father is not responsible for my sin. I will die if I disobey God. It's a different covenant in one sense. Not in one sense. It really is a different covenant that that we have here compared to the old one. There are other differences. I'm only emphasizing here in what they're looking at, but there are many other things that you can look at. Yes, do you?
Yeah, he said Isaiah and the true prophets, he's letting them know there's a change coming. There's a change coming. And I'm doing it, and I'm laying it all out so you can see it. You can see it. It's going to be from the seed, from the order of Melchizedek. All these things. When you read it, you should be able to see it as you study God's word every day. If you're doing that, but if you're listening to the false prophet, the false teacher, all of that kind of stuff, you're wasting your time. You'll never see it. And that's still true today. If you spend any time listening for one second, a false teacher, you're setting yourself up for loss. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it. I know people like to listen to this guy or that guy, and after reading Ezekiel, I don't do it. No.
Yeah, I was going to say in Ezekiel goes into a little bit greater detail, and we just don't have time for me to go and read it, but he does give a little bit more explanation than what Jeremiah gives here in verse 29 on this new covenant.
Throughout their history, there's always been a remnant of faithful who suffered when the entire nation received a judgment. And so in that old covenant, you saw how I could suffer. Jeremiah suffered. He was a righteous man. He suffered, but he was in the midst of Jerusalem when it was being destroyed. He wasn't able to, take his own advice and flee into Chaldea. But now as Christians, we already know the word. We have made the choice to come into the kingdom. And so there's no more of that. Everyone is going to die for their own sin. Certainly not for anyone else's, even though on this earth we still might suffer because of the sins of the people around us. And that's why this word was such a hope for the people in their day. They had king after king after king that did not act righteously, that oppressed the people, that let sins continue on in the nation before God ever gets around to bringing the punishment around. And so Jeremiah and the rest of the prophets are saying there's a time coming. It's not today, but there's a time coming, and all of those problems are going to be over. It does not matter whether we're in the midst of Russia, the United States, or Palestine, or anywhere else in the world. I can be a Christian. It doesn't matter who the president is. I can be a Christian because my Lord is in heaven, and I'm going to live as a Christian no matter where I am.
Yeah. One of the things that I've found helpful with this are the prayers that you see, for example, Daniel's prayer and Nehemiah's prayer. Under that old covenant, he's not praying to say, I have sinned, or they're praying for the entire nation. My father's house has sinned. We have sinned. When Daniel is praying, he's praying for the entire nation. We and our fathers have sinned. They're always referenced as a nation in those prayers because under that covenant, they were all one. In this case, when you're looking at it, each one is going to be responsible for their own sin. And that the salvation that we will under this covenant is a little bit different. I find it helpful for me, maybe not for others, to kind of look at some of how they're praying some of those prayers, some of the things and the references that you have when Moses is actually talking to this new generation that's about to cross over in Deuteronomy, and our time is up. In Deuteronomy, he is saying, you as a whole nation. He never refers to them and just say, this house, Judah, or that person. It's you. Here's what God did for you. It's not your fathers. Yes, your fathers did this, but it's you. That's helpful when you look at how, up to this point, how this nation looks like, what they have done, how God looks at them when he calls them. He calls them Jacob, he calls them Israel. Thank you very much for your attention, and we're about a couple minutes over here. Sorry.